We own the image rights of all our players and the coach. And that's, by the way, an even more added value at the moment, having Conte in our team. And that helps a lot on two levels. First of all, of course, makes the whole squad planning more sustainable, because while negotiating transfers of new players, especially big players, you can take into account the returns from the commercial perspective that you can get, and then the planning is very different.
Hello and welcome to the Sports Pundit Podcast, the show for people shaping the future of sport. Driven by my curiosity working in the industry, I've brought together leading executives to host conversations with decision makers across innovation, marketing, media, finance, and performance, unpacking their strategies and industry-shaping ideas. On today's episode of the Sports Pundit Innovation Podcast, I step in for Leanne to interview Leonardo Giammarioli, Chief Global Business Development Officer at SSC Napoli, to unpack how one of Italy's biggest clubs is building a smarter and more sustainable commercial model. Leonardo has worked across the sports business from multiple angles, including agency side at SPORTFIVE, brand side at NIVEA, and within clubs across different football cultures, giving him what he describes as a 360 view of how the ecosystem works. At Napoli, that perspective matters because the club's ambition is clear: to compete at the top level without the financial profile of Europe's super clubs. In this conversation, we explore two of Napoli's most distinct advantages. First, the club's approach to squad-wide image rights, which gives sponsors clearer access to players, reduces category conflicts, and even feeds into the transfer decision-making through commercial forecasting. Secondly, we look at Napoli's end-to-end control of merchandise, which has transformed both brand perception and profitability, from premium sponsorship alignment to rapid culture-led drops tailored to specific markets. So if you're interested in how a club can build modern commercial leverage through ownership, control, and smarter infrastructure, this episode is a masterclass in commercial innovation. I'd also like to give my thanks to Social Football Summit, an event designed for innovative content, sharing, networking, and education in the football industry. Its inception aimed to build a dynamic and innovative ecosystem with the objective of creating opportunities for encounters between authoritative figures and key players in the football industry. Figures like Leonardo, who I was lucky enough to interview on stage at the latest edition back in November. We touched on a number of those points during that panel discussion, and there was so much interest that we decided to dive in even deeper for the podcast. So without further ado, please enjoy my conversation with Leonardo Giammarioli. It was great to hear a bit about what you're up to in Turin when we spoke then, but I feel like there's so much more depth we can get into. So it's great to have you on the podcast to explore things a little bit deeper. But before we get into what you're doing now at Napoli, it would be great to start maybe with your personal journey. You can take this in whatever direction you like, but I think it's just always useful to give the listeners a little bit of context in terms of your background. You've worked brand side, you've worked agency side, you've worked for other clubs in other countries. So I feel like it's worth maybe just giving people a little bit of a short history of your career to date.
Sure. And first of all, thanks, Andy, for having me here. I've been in the sport business across different angles, so to speak. So I've seen agency work at SPORTFIVE. I was in Qatar for Qatar Sports Investments, so having a bit of an overview of how state fund investment in sport work. I've been at different clubs in Germany, in Italy, and at Bayersdorf, so NIVEA, which allowed me to be at the other side of the table where I normally am, and understanding what it takes for a brand to invest in sports and what's the need. At the same time, knowing what the sport properties can do. So I think I have a good perspective from different angles, different cultures, football cultures, which gave me a bit of a 360 degrees vision on how to manage a sport property, which I think it's important as the landscape is becoming more and more complex. So I think it's good to have a bigger vision on all the aspects involved.
Yeah, and I guess that becomes even more important now because, there's a lot of rights holders as media rights decline or become less secure. There's a lot of focus from clubs and leagues to find new revenue streams. And I guess if you're able to understand the entire ecosystem, then there's ways you can perhaps better capitalize on those opportunities than a rights holder that doesn't understand it from a brand's perspective or doesn't understand it from an agency or a broadcaster's perspective.
Yeah, that's right. And particularly for clubs like ours, we're not, the moment at least, the likes of Manchester United or Bayern Munich or Paris. So we need to stay competitive and stay financially sustainable at top levels. So you need to get smart on how you do this. And that's our challenge now.
Yeah. Maybe you can go into a few of the ways that Napoli is being smart in how they're operating. You obviously worked previously at NIVEA, and so you've seen it from a brand's perspective, some of the challenges maybe with working with clubs in terms of getting access to certain players. And the approach that you're taking at Napoli is slightly different when it comes to player image rights and the way that you're able to then commercialize that. So maybe that's a good place to start, because I appreciate it's not always easy to tell yourself that you're being smart, but that's definitely one way that I think you're being smart.
Yeah, I have to give credit to our president for that, because that was his intuition. And of course, we benefit from it and makes it exciting. We own the image rights of all our players and the coach. And that's, by the way, an even more added value at the moment, having Conte in our team. And that helps a lot on two levels. First of all, of course, makes the whole squad planning more sustainable, because while negotiating transfers of new players, especially big players, you can take into account the returns from the commercial perspective that you can get, and then the planning is very different. I am involved in the transfer in this sense, like having to give a feeling or a forecast on how much can we get back from commercial value when signing the player. The others, as you fairly said, from a sponsor perspective, this is a massive upside, because first of all, we avoid clashes with existing sponsors, or new sponsors want to come to Napoli. They know that they become sponsor of the club, they will get easy access to the players. Also individually, when I was back in NIVEA, we had always this issue with the clubs who were sponsoring, Real Madrid and partly also Liverpool and PSG, where we sponsored the club, but maybe the top players were having individual endorsement with competitors in our branch. So it's always difficult to have this scenario. So here in Napoli, we grant this, and at the same time, it's also additional source of revenue, if you like, because there are some sponsors that might not feel comfortable sponsoring the club, fearing polarization, for example, and rather go for individual endorsement. And we can offer both, basically. So I think it widens our offering, and at the same time, it makes more efficient and more effective for sponsor to leverage on the platform they invest into. That's great.
Yeah. Maybe for context, you can explain what the normal situation looks like at a club in terms of if you're NIVEA and you're speaking to a club about a partnership with someone like Real Madrid, what does that look like in terms of access to player IP and the ability to use players?
But normally you have collective rights of the players. So whatever you want to do in terms of activation, so be this a photo shooting or a video or content in general, you have to have a fair share of 4 players, 4 or 5, sometimes 3, but have to be collective. And each of them have to have the same portion of exposure. And more importantly, you don't get to pick and choose which one you get. So of course, things can happen. So maybe you selected the players even with us, and then the player gets injured and then has to leave, and you cannot have him. That's part of the risk. But at other clubs, you normally get the players that the club is willing to give, or at least is able to give. And that, of course, influences and impacts the whole content that you want to produce. So having the image rights allow more flexibility on both sides, and more bespoke content can be in time planned, produced, created, and rolled out according to the brand's need.
And I guess that's why in some commercials where you have an athlete, you know, they might play for Man United, but they'll be wearing like a red t-shirt in the campaign because they have the player, but they don't have the club. And then vice versa, you might have situations where a brand has a deal with a club, but they're really interested in a certain market where there might be a player at that club that plays for that team, but then they're not able to necessarily secure the player in that market, right?
Yeah.
And so it might just end up bringing us the campaign.
And at the same time, for us, we have sometimes international players which are relevant for their markets, but not necessarily globally or in Italy. So maybe they don't need to have Napoli elements on it, but they still want to do something with them. Yeah. I think De Bruyne is a clear example, or Lukaku or McTominay. And then we can still offer them whatever they need without necessarily, putting our Napoli strong elements in the activation. Yeah. So again, widen our offer and makes everything more sustainable.
And what does that look like from the player's perspective, right? Like, so if a player's like prior to joining Napoli, they own their image rights, or I guess the majority of their image rights, and their agent or their team is looking to basically commercialize them independent of the club, and the club is doing their thing and the player's doing their thing. And, the club might have Nike and they might have Adidas, and they might be working with NIVEA and they might be working with L'Oreal. When they come to join Napoli, what is the conversation that has to be had in terms of like, what does that negotiation look like for the image rights, and then what does that commercially look like for the player? Did they then get like a share of the rights that they're helping to produce, or are they being paid up front for those rights?
Yeah, I mean, it kind of depends. So it's a little bit of a case by case approach. Normally, it all comes down to a number that we agreed, and then off we go. I mean, the players, of course, is aware of what is going to be the scenario in the future. So after everything is agreed, things are quite smooth and simple. Again, there are some differences, but ultimately, the main contracts that we inherited are those for the boots, the shoes, like Nike, Adidas, Puma, you name it. In these cases, we keep them out for the ongoing contract. So that if there is a 3 years contract with Nike, with the players, or Adidas, he's signing for us up to 2 years. The first year remains with the players. So he will still get full of the amount for that year. But starting from the year after, we will manage and we will negotiate the deal with whoever we see fit for the players and, of course, for the club. At the same time, players have to feel comfortable in the shoes that he wears, the boots that he wears, clearly. So that's the first thing. So it's not something that we don't involve the player into at all. It would be a common discussion, a common conversation, but we will be in the lead after the expiration of the previous contract. Whereas for all the other categories, we get right into it and we manage everything from the first day. Of course, when the players leaves Napoli, if the players leave Napoli, then he will become again the owner of his image rights. So we don't keep the image rights even after the permanence, like the time of the player at the club. So these are the parameters, more or less.
Yeah. And in terms of you talking about being involved in transfer decisions, how typical is that for someone in a business or revenue focused role within a club to actually have a say on that? What does that look like? Is it a case of the president ringing you and saying, we have the ability to sign X player? How much revenue do you think you can generate from having this player within the Napoli sort of ecosystem? Or
Yeah. I mean, of course, I never did this before in my career, so it's kind of exciting. Normally, the best that happened before was okay, if there is a player from some strategic region like Asia or America, if he could bring along some commercial value, then I would be asked my opinion. But here happens quite normally, especially for big signings. And it's either the president or the sporting director who call me up when they are not 100% sure about the value that is demanded from the player or from the agency. Okay, do you think this is good? Can we get the money back? Can we make even more? And sometimes it's just to be reassured that it's working. Sometimes it's really, okay, we have two options. What do you think commercially would give us more value? So, of course, my decision is not final. I'm not making the call on the transfer, but it's part of the KPIs that are taken into consideration in a bigger conversation regarding transfer, which, of course, I only see part of. But yes, it's definitely part of the negotiation.
Yeah. And I think, as we kind of alluded to, this is fairly unique to Napoli. There's not tons of teams doing this. So I guess it's hard for you to speak on behalf of other clubs, but you've worked in some, so you might understand the psyche of other ownership groups. What is it about Napoli that led them to go down this route? What do you think's preventing other clubs from doing it so far? Is there an interest from other clubs to follow suit? And what are the tactical elements that they would need to achieve before they could do that? Because I assume that there's some renegotiation of existing contracts and things. So it probably isn't something that can happen really quickly.
No, it doesn't happen quickly. So it's very tense in summer when we have this kind of conversation. And I understand bigger clubs, which are more accustomed to sign top players, might find it too complicated or time consuming or maybe financially not viable to do so. Again, Napoli does everything a bit in a different way, has to stay relevant in the scenario where we want to be, which is being amongst top clubs without having the revenues of top clubs. So that's one of the reasons we're doing this. And the president, coming from the film industry, he always owned the image rights of the actors to promote the films, and he thought he can apply this to football. To be honest with you, I was surprised how different is the expectation of the players when it comes to this kind of conversation. So we had players demanding a lot, players demanding more reasonable. It's really random. And it shows that it's not really a regulated area of the business. And I think other clubs might find it interesting to see what kind of conversation you get to have with specific players. Of course, the other reason is that you might lose a big signing. It happened to us in the past, and in the end, we decided not to because you wouldn't agree to that. But ultimately, we're very happy with the squad we have. And I think the fact that players sign up for this also show commitment to the project, and that's really important.
Yeah. The other club I can think of that has some sort of image rights element to it, like Real Madrid, are famously known to take sort of 50% of the image rights of players. Why do you think they take half, whereas Napoli can take the whole? Is it just because the players that they're dealing with are Galacticos that are doing much more on the commercial space on their own?
I think, yes, it's a matter of the magnitude of the players involved. But to be honest, in my opinion, it's one of those things where you either own 100% or it's pointless to have half of it, at least when it comes to exploiting it. Of course, you get 50% of any deal the players make, but then as a club, you're less incentivized to find sponsor, to look for it. So you more sit and wait and then exploit the revenues coming from the players. In that case, the player is the driver. In this case, we are the driver, and the players appreciate that. And of course, when we have big players like De Bruyne, McTominay, they also come to us. Sponsor come to us. So it's a give and take. I think Real Madrid is a bit of a different dimension and with different dynamics, I suppose.
Yeah. I guess when you've worked previously at agencies, a lot of top clubs, the sponsorship categories that they're looking for, like the big ones in terms of the shirt, the sleeve, maybe the stadium, typically will get outsourced to an agency that will help them find those sponsors, because it doesn't necessarily justify having a big commercial team in-house if you're only looking for a new front of shirt sponsor every 4 or 5 years. I can imagine, given that you're constantly negotiating deals with players and opportunities to commercialize individual players, but then to commercialize collective groups as well, like maybe there's a greater justification for having kind of like a built-in commercial team. Like how much of the sort of sponsorship activity within Napoli happens in-house versus kind of working alongside existing agencies?
Yeah, our team is quite small. The whole club is a bit of a family business. We keep it small because the president wants to have direct relationship with everybody, and then we cannot be too many to ensure this. Of course, we gain more control of our assets, and we have 360 degrees vision on everything that happens at the club. That doesn't mean that we don't work with agencies. We do. We don't appoint agencies to look for sponsor on our behalf. It's more agencies approaching us with clients. We evaluate the opportunity on a case-by-case basis. And when we sign a mandate, we know what we're dealing with. But if you look at our main sponsors, so really like the shirt sponsors or the training kit sponsors, it's all direct relationship we had and we have. And we normally try to get a very bespoke approach to each and every sponsor, also as a premium sponsor or a global sponsor. So it's not a frozen deck that we send out across the world to get somebody interested. Where we work with agencies a lot more is for the regional sponsorship, so the territorial partnerships around the world, because that's mostly media deals. And this is normally a budget that comes from agencies. Wouldn't make sense for us to go in each and every market and secure some partnerships. But for the big ones, we like to explain Napoli ourselves, because it's a different story. The image rights of the player is something that is part of the conversation, which maybe agencies are not used to. We have a lot more that we need to explain: our brand, our product, our apparel. Everything is a bit unique. And that's what convinced the sponsors to invest in Napoli. So it's a storytelling that we need to control, because it's easier this way.
Yeah. And since joining the club, how has that approach to sponsors changed? Because I think in the past, if you think about like Napoli kits, they're probably one of the clubs where it looked a little bit more like a motorsport jersey in terms of having like multiple patches across the front. And obviously that's now been stripped back. The sponsor as well is like fairly premium in terms of MSC Cruises and Armani kind of, and we can talk about the merchandise afterwards. But it feels like there's been a deliberate attempt maybe to recategorize Napoli's kind of position in the market.
Yeah, that's another big intuition of our president. He took the club in 2004 when it was bankrupt and it was in the third league. It spent the first 20 years to bring it back to the sports successes, which he managed to successfully do. Now he is, since 2-3 years, he's focused on revamping the brand of the club itself and make it stronger. And that's, of course, ahead of the 100-year anniversary, which will happen in 2026. So there's been a big focus on upgrading the partnership, the platform of Napoli, and therefore, of course, the sponsorship that came to us. I think, as you just mentioned, a lot has been made possible with regaining control of our merchandising and shifting from a, if you allow me, cheap brand perception to a premium property that attracts a lot of brand. And then again, is a very personal relationship that drove this upgrade. Armani is a personal connection that the president had with George Armani himself some years ago. MSC is also a very strategic sponsor which operates in the area of Napoli. And we had in the past on the sleeve top brands like Amazon, like eBay, again linked to the e-commerce opportunities that we could trigger thanks to the end-to-end control that we have of the product. So it's part of a complex and thought-through strategy of changing the perception of Napoli from, as you probably put it, a motorcycle or motorbike brand to a premium sport properties, and it's paying off.
And in terms of then identifying, I guess, like you mentioned MSC work in the region, like are there certain kind of characteristics, I guess, that you look for amongst brands in terms of like, are you looking for brands that are like operating locally in Napoli? Are you looking for brands that have, global reach that can take you into new markets? Is there certain categories that you're specifically focused on right now in terms of that you would love to bring to Napoli?
Yes, it's a bit of both. So I think Napoli is a very eclectic city. There are top brands working there, top companies with global reach. MSC, one of those. We have our mineral water on the back shirt, which is the still mineral water brand of Lete. Lete was a brand that was with us from the beginning of this new adventure 20 years ago, and now is, after trying with Napoli, become major sponsor of Italy and a national team, now Atalanta. So they grew with us. But at the same time, now it's the moment to reach more global brands. So I mentioned eBay and Amazon, but we're working with other global brands. Of course, EA Sports, one of those. We have now a blockchain partner based out of North America, a lot of regional sponsorship. So the idea here is to offer the sponsor platform that speaks about the roots of the club, which is Napoli, but at the same time has the ambition to become globally relevant, keeping the local spirit. And that's also something that we see working very well. And the 100-year anniversary next year will be the key moment to reveal this global ambition of Napoli and its partners.
Okay. And then going through onto the merchandise thing, because I guess like besides the image rights, the merchandise is another one that I think is fairly unique to Naples. Both, I think the fact that you've kind of verticalized that element of the business, but also like the sheer quantity of different types of kit that have been launched by Napoli, like launching like a Christmas edition or like one with, Diego Maradona on. Like it feels like there's all these like special edition shirts that Napoli release. So maybe you can just talk a little bit about the ethos behind firstly owning it outright, and then kind of the flexibility that then allows you in terms of being maybe more creative with the releases and the drops, and not necessarily having to stick to the templated designs of the other big clubs.
Yeah, definitely. That was one of the key elements that allow us to grow massively in the past 5 years. I think during the COVID, president decided to move away from a kit supplier deal and decided to produce everything in-house, which of course was a challenge when you do it during the COVID with all the supply chain restructuring that was happening back then. But ultimately it paid off. I think the first result was the perception. So we gained control of our brand. We had Armani joining this adventure from the very beginning. And when you have a clean shirt with the likes of Armani, MSC, Coca-Cola for the training kit that is happy to come when it's sitting next to Armani, and giving everything a premium perception, that alone brought us, I think, 120% more in terms of sponsorship in the last 5 years. So it was amazing. And of course, the margin that we have by controlling everything from design to production to distribution and to retail and wholesale sale, that was massive. I think we moved from maybe 10% royalties on what we were selling to a 60% margin on each and every item that we sell, in average, of course, around the world. We move from 9 to 10 million revenues from the merchandising, including, of course, a sponsorship deal with our kid suppliers back then, to 17 million now margin, again, not revenues. And the aim is to reach the 20 million for the 100-year collection. So we're looking at least a 20 million margin, doubling the money that we were making. And on top of that is, of course, what you mentioned, the very added value. When you work with big kit suppliers, you have templates, you have to agree on a design a year before, a year and a half, maybe sometimes 2 years, which limits the opportunities to act on a trend, on a momentum, to listen to the fans. And here we have total flexibility. With 3 months' time, we can come up with a collection, with a special edition. You mentioned the one with Maradona. We just launched the Halloween one in October, always sold out. Last year, we did the Partenope shirts, celebrating 2,500 years from the foundation of the city. Again, sold out. We're preparing something exciting for February next year too. So we have this flexibility, not only on the shirt, on the jersey, but also on other collections. And this flexibility is not only for the global business, but also for local business. So we can create bespoke collection for US. And maybe we're working now on a baseball collection specifically for US market, or an anime collection for Japan, where we also have a strong presence now. And this gives us the opportunity to stand out also in markets where Napoli is not the first choice of a buyer, because why would I buy a Napoli shirt? But maybe there is a cool design, maybe there is a cool element, and that helps us to go ahead. And of course, having top players helps in specific region, but this end-to-end control is what gave us the added value that we are now capitalizing on. And I think the biggest yet to come nostalgic collection for the 100th anniversary of the years of Maradona, things like this will be big drivers for growth.
Yeah. And in terms of, I guess, like weighing up the pros and cons, right? So I can see a lot of pros in terms of flexibility. The con could potentially be that a big brand like Adidas or Nike has distribution levers that they can pull in terms of getting you at retail visibility in certain markets and pushing kind of advertising campaigns where maybe someone wearing a Napoli shirt is on the front of the billboard in, Times Square or whatever it is. I guess like the challenge there is like, if you're, not, like you said, buying Paris, Barcelona, Real Madrid, like maybe that those benefits become lesser. And so maybe it makes more sense if you're kind of below that kind of, obviously Napoli is a top club, but like below that kind of absolute elite top 6 maybe globally that drives so much of that conversation. What's your thoughts on it?
Yeah, of course. We're missing on an opportunity to be really globally distributed efficiently, at least. If you think that the numbers I mentioned earlier are mostly happening in Italy and in the Napoli region, so just imagine what is the potential that we have globally, given all the fans we have around the world. And that's even more exciting because it means that the growth margin is even bigger, because now we're starting to target specific countries, specific markets. So I mentioned North America because of the big fan base we have there. The World Cup coming next year. Australia is another big one for us, so with a lot of Italian communities and big Napoli fan communities there. Japan, we just opened one. South America, of course, Argentina, but also Brazil. And it's a challenge because it's about distributing, producing, delivering, and shipping, and tariffs and everything. So you need to be in control of all the aspects. A lot of expertise required, by the way, that normally you don't have inside the club, because it's the kit supplier that takes care of this. And yet it gives you always the pulse of the situation, of the markets, and you have full control of the tools to address the challenges. We will do now a rollout plan for the new 100-year collections, selecting specific markets and specific retailers and specific distributors there, having a one-to-one conversation with them. And also the production has to be accordingly set for the demand. The biggest new approaches that we have had are a new e-commerce partner that is bringing massive results. We already tripled the revenue of last year in e-commerce, and not even Christmas time. And a new production. So we have a new producer who will be able to find production spots and production slots across the world in different areas. So not only in one territory as we used to. So that maybe for a specific collection line, we produce in Vietnam for another, in Italy for another one, in America, or even depending on the demands of the territory, we can localize the production. So it's a very complex business. It takes some years to get a full oil machine on it, but the results are always very comforting. So it's exciting and it's a margin for growth.
I can imagine as well, like you say, if you have fans in certain markets, you also then have the ability to adjust the production of the product in that market to be more sensitive to the price that suits that region, right? Like obviously if you're selling 140 euro shirts in Vietnam or Thailand, it's probably going to be difficult for people to afford them, right? And people then end up just buying kind of unofficial replicas that have been sold for much smaller margins. So I think Liverpool tried to do something where they launched like an official, unofficial jersey in certain Asian markets. But I can see where, that gives you more flexibility. But talking about, I guess, that global reach, like you mentioned, you have these fans all around the world that have kind of a tie back to Naples and Napoli. And you've launched this new global membership program leveraging, I think, as a blockchain partner, right? Or a blockchain platform in order to kind of better understand these fans. So maybe you could just explain a little bit more about what the thought process here is for this global membership program.
Yeah, it's the first step of a more integrated digital ecosystem that we are building. And what the key elements here the key objective is to collect data from our fans around the world, get in touch with them, or even get in touch with them in the first place, and creating therefore touch points for them to come closer to our environment. Again, that's one of the projects that goes under the umbrella of the 100-year anniversary coming back home. We have our motto, which is from Napoli to the world, and for next year we want to bring it from the world back to Napoli, metaphorically, of course. The key thinking behind this membership program, which is kind of a loyalty program in the first place, is to better understand our fans, our fan behavior, and act on that and give them what they want, what they wish for, what they cannot get because maybe they don't live in Naples or close to the team. And at the same time, opening up to a new target group, which we are not talking to at the moment. And that's where our blockchain partner comes to support. It's not only because he enable a very transparent platform so that every transaction that happens on this loyalty program is saved on blockchain and therefore super transparent. But it's also a way for us to connect with the target group, which from a geographical, a demographical, and an interest-based perspective, we couldn't reach. And we need to always keep in mind that our main competitors is not other teams, it's not Juventus fan becoming Juventus fan instead of Napoli fan or Manchester United fan, because normally you're born with a faith and you keep that. Our main competitors are other forms of entertainment. So we see a shift from the younger generation away from football and more into other sort of entertainment. And we need to intercept that and bring them back to us. And at the same time, it's also a way to open new business area. The membership allows a B2B and a B2C new source of revenues. The B2B, because of course, our sponsors are more interested in having the profile information about our fan and get more targeted offering and activation. And at the same time, with our fans as well, because we have, for example, in the premium membership, we give out vouchers for merchandising that can get from the eShop. And out of those who use this voucher, I think 85% were new customers that never bought anything in our shop. And now they have done this experience and they will redo it probably. We are creating new fans, if you like, or following or leading a new fan behavior that will generate more sustainable incomes. Also because we are able to meet our fan demands better. Now it's like shooting in the dark. In the future, 1 year down the line, we will have a very clear understanding of the fan expectation and be more adjusted to that, therefore more effective in our offering. So it's the first of a journey digital ecosystem, which I personally believe it's crucial to stay in the game the way we want to stay.
Yeah, I think there's a recognition that existing purely on social is difficult because you don't have that direct ownership of the fan. I guess the common thread through everything that you spoke about today has been about trying to own the entire relationship between whether it's with the players and then being able to then manage the commercials, the kit supplier, and being able to then, adjust accordingly and protect the Napoli brand, but also move in the ways that you want to move. And then it sounds like the same is now playing out with trying to own that fan base. I guess one question around kind of like trying to create these digital ecosystems is, there's a lot of clubs trying to create their own fan apps so that they can start to collect that fan data. And there's this balance between like how much do you put on social as kind of like that top of funnel versus how much do you keep back behind a wall to kind of drive people in. Like, do you see content as the driver of why people join that membership program? What do you think is the sort of most tangible, valuable asset that people are signing up for when they become a member of the Napoli membership program?
Yeah, I think the social media content, as you mentioned, is like a shouting in the dark. So of course you create content. It's like a shop window for the club, but you don't, at least in our experience, we don't get so much value out of it. It's more to advertise our philosophy, our platform and everything. But in the membership, you really become part of the family. So you have tangible advantages and you get access to behind the curtain of this club. And that's what fans really want, because interacting on the social, yes, of course, fan engagement is important. But when you're a member and you get to fly with the team for an away game in the Champions League for 2 or 3 winners and sit there, and we saw it with the fans who won this prize, how exciting it is for them, or to come to the hotel and have a meet and greet with the players, or simply to have dedicated content for them, personalized messages from the players. But this is the real next level that fans are looking for. I think fans of all clubs are looking for. But we at Napoli are able to make this happen because, again, this is a family. It feels a family in the offices and it feels a family with the fans. The membership is allowing us to speak to them individually and to offer them individually what is relevant for them. Yeah. Social media and content is, of course, like, hey, that's what we're up to. But if you really want to be part of it, we have now a tool for you to do so. And that's exciting.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for sharing these insights. I think, as far as clubs go, you're definitely one that's doing things differently and approaching things in unique ways. And so I think there's a lot that can be learned and borrowed from the approach that you and the entire Napoli family are taking to becoming, like you said, I think the most sustainable club in Europe, right? So like that result speaks for itself in terms of saying it may be different, but ultimately it's working. And that's the proof. So
yeah. And again, we managed to be sustainable and winning, which is unbelievable. I mean, we won 2 national titles in 3 years. And 3 years ago, we made 80 million profit at the end of the year. And there's a lot of liquidity in the club thanks to this approach, which is very unique and very enlightening. There's some secret recipe, of course, which I won't share here. But again, we have so much resources that once we sign Conte and he wants a big squad, we can do 300 million investment like we did last summer without blinking an eye, because we plan for it. And that's the next step. How can we stay in that level in the next years? And I think one of the crucial challenges here is to have a decent infrastructure, but that's again a bit out of our hands. We're trying to do as much as we can, but a new stadium would be probably crucial for reaching that level and stay there.
Yeah. Well, I'm a Tottenham fan, so I got to see Antonio Conte suffer and not win anything. So I'm glad to see he's doing better now. He's back in Italy. And yeah, it's great to see the success that you guys are having on and off the pitch.
Thank you. Yeah. And he and the president are really the same people. They just want to do things their way because they find the right way for the right context. You cannot have a frozen approach wherever you go. Like every club is a different story, has a different story. And I think what really drives success is to bring expertise and adapt them to the context where you operate. And I think that's the secret of Napoli and probably of Conte as well.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much for coming on the podcast.
Thank you very much. It was great talking to you.
Thank you for listening to the Sports Pundit podcast, kindly produced by the amazing team at O6. I'll include more information about the guests and the topics covered in the show notes. Head to sportspundit.co to find previous editions, access the newsletter, and to sign up for our WhatsApp group and see upcoming social events in cities around the world. See you again soon.